Looking at scenario two now, the specifically netball. To summarise, you have the goal shooter Sarah, who is quite consistent within her training and games, but in certain games against Lewis and Varndine, her scoring average is much lower. And you also have a teammate, one of Sarah's teammates, Rachel's, who has a negative attitude towards her, and Rachel seems to be consistent with her performance throughout all games. Now looking at eustress versus distress. So this graph shows that as some stress levels are actually useful, so slight levels of stress will increase from calmness to eustress, and this shows that the performance will increase up to an optimal point, which is eustress. Once stress increases even more, though, performance starts to drop as they reach into distress. Sarah, for example, is consistent in training, yet diminishes during the important games against Lewis and Varndine. This means that training and other games of the league, she's most likely in the eustress zone. However, when she gets to these games with Lewis and Varndine, she reaches these. Her stress increases even more, where performance starts to drop, resulting in distress. And this is shown by her scoring average going from 86% and dropping down to 32%. Some reasons for this can be it's towards the end of the season, so it's important game. They might need to be able to win this game to get their final points. You also have many spectators can watch, so the added stress of many people watching you, that could be friends, because it's quite local games. So it could be friends, could be opposition, so opposition's friends putting you off. But either way, that would add extra stress onto Sarah's performance. And you also, Sarah's aware of Rachel's attitude to her. So Rachel has a negative attitude towards Sarah during these games because of Sarah's scoring average is so much lower than what she's used to. And this in itself can put more stress on Sarah as well. She wants to try to please the team in a way, and so would be more stressful when she gets the chance to shoot, as she knows that she kind of needs to score. And overall, this all combines to make Sarah overstressed in the distress category during the games against Lewis and Varndine. Rachel, on the other hand, is consistent, if not better, during the tough and important games. As it's shown here, she gets received player of the game several times throughout the season and during the tough games. So this shows that Rachel is likely to experience a eustress during her performance, which is why she's performing so well against Lewis and Varndine. Now, the stress process, as we said right at the beginning, that stress is how a person perceives it. And this shows it here. So you have a situational demand, and for Sarah, this would be a league game against Lewis and Varndine. And Rachel is likely to perceive this as positive, whereas Sarah is likely to receive this and perceive this as negative. And this is how this results in Sarah's performance through this negative perception to have too much stress, so she causes distress and therefore decreases her performance throughout the game. Whereas Rachel's attitude and perception towards these tough games is positive, meaning that she has a bit of stress, but optimal levels of stress to cause eustress, which then improves her performance, which is why she would be receiving player of the game several times. Looking at anxiety now, there are multiple types of anxiety. So you first have cognitive anxiety against somatic anxiety. So we know that cognitive anxiety is the psychological components of anxiety. This is mentally perceiving potential upcoming events to be negative. And the word potential showing that these events that they are mentally picturing or perceiving might not actually happen. There's only a chance it could happen. So this could be Sarah worrying that she will play badly during the upcoming game against Lewis or Van Dien. She's not guaranteed to play bad, but she's perceiving that she will play bad, and this anxiety then can result in her performing bad during the game. The somatic anxiety, now this is the physiological factors of anxiety, and this is how the individual, so Sarah or Rachel, perceives their own physiological changes before an event, this can either benefit them or reduce their performance. So, for example, Sarah could experience increased muscle tension, which makes her or reduces her agility to start with, which is something you need in a netball match quite a lot. And for example, and from this could make her doubt her performance to start, but also would affect her negatively and decrease her performance. Whereas Rachel could have the same effects, yet she perceives it in a positive way and uses that to then improve or utilize it in her performance. There's also state anxiety. So this is temporary. And this is according to a situation which a person or an individual is in, which can be perceived as threatening. And this can either be cognitive or somatic, although it can be both. So this is talking about examples we were talking about here with Sarah worrying she'll play badly during a game. But this is only temporary, as this won't last very long, as this, although cognitive anxiety lasts longer than the somatic anxiety, she could be worrying about this for a week, maybe 2 weeks before the game, whereas the somatic anxiety would be quite soon before the game. And she will perceive this match as potentially threatening, as there's a lot of pressure and she has a lot of stress towards this. Competitive anxiety, this is where the performer perceives certain sporting situations as potentially threatening or important. So if Sarah is taking a penalty shot, for example, and she needs to score this to win the game in the last few minutes, she would have a lot of anxiety towards that shot, and if this anxiety builds up, she's likely to miss that shot. Although people have utilised this before and can use this to then benefit their performance, so they're more likely to shoot and get it in. There are different ways to measure anxiety. One of these is the Competitive State Anxiety Inventory by Martins, 1990. And this is a graph showing that this blue line here showing cognitive anxiety and the green line showing somatic anxiety. Now you can see here that cognitive anxiety can be quite high up to a week before performance, whereas somatic anxiety only starts to build 2 hours before performance. And you see they both peak at the start of performance. So cognitive state anxiety, you can see it increases as the performer gets closer and closer to their competition. And during competition, you can see 1 hour into it's decreased, and it is likely to decrease, but then will also fluctuate here depending on how the performer is performing during their match or competition, with success is likely to then decrease their anxiety, but failure is likely to increase anxiety, because the more failures there are, the less likely the performer will feel like they're going to win or have the chance to win. Looking at the somatic state anxiety here, you can see it's slight increase a day before and then 2 hours before, and then there's a sharper increase, a steeper gradient to this when you get to 2 hours and 1 hour and the start of of the competition. And then you can see as the performer is performing during their match or competition, you can see there's a gradual decrease of somatic anxiety during this, as the performer is then used to playing in their match. Another theory linking arousal is catastrophe theory, and this was developed by Fazey and Hardy in 1988. And they believe that performance doesn't always gradually change and is dependent on the cognitive anxiety levels of the performer. So look at this graph here. If a performer was to have low cognitive anxiety, it follows this this pattern here, which looks similar to the inverted U theory, with low performance linked to low physiological arousal. And as physiological arousal increases to an optimum, so does performance. And then after that optimum, as physiological arousal increases, performance then begins to decrease again. However, if the performer was to have high cognitive anxiety, this model suggests that it sticks to the pattern again. So there's a gradual increase in performance as physiological arousal increases up to optimum once again. But then as physiological arousal increases again, there's this dramatic drop in performance, which shows this catastrophe theory. And this is and Sarah supports this theory here, as during training and other local games during the season, her scoring average has been 86%. So it's likely that she's been performing round here in her optimal level. But during these games against Lewis and Varndine, her scoring average has just fallen all the way down to 32%. And this could be because it's a local game and quite an important game, and also many spectators can watch this game, and overall all contributes to an increase in her arousal and an increase past this point where her performance will suddenly drop, which is shown here in this 32% scoring average. Although it is also suggested that if she can reduce her arousal, that her performance will gradually get better again. So she could potentially use some arousal controlling techniques, as spoken about earlier, to then get her scoring average back up to this around this 86% mark during this match, if she was to control her arousal, as this is reversible.